leaders. We're back again for our third session of Paul the Apostle called Keep the Faith. Check out the video on Right Now Media if you haven't done that yet. We're going to talk about what's in the book and what you can expect this week. So make sure you've got your handy dandy session 3 guide and we'll go from there. Alright, so the first thing you'll see in the book here is a section out of David Nasser's book called Grace Anatomy. This is really more for your reference. It's not necessarily something you want to read to the group. It's not really going to add anything to your discussion. It's just more of a background piece for where David's going with the video this week. So take it or leave it, but that's there for you as a resource. All right, the introduction this week really covers and recaps what we did last week with the Roman Road. If your group got into that, you may want to check it out, especially if you did the challenge to memorize one of the verses. It's a good follow-up piece. The icebreaker, I highly recommend. It asks a really good question. It's a great opportunity for internal processors to spend some time thinking, and it puts them in the feet of Paul and really what he was experiencing in prison, having his only way of communicating with these churches that he's connected with from far away by letter, which isn't exactly a thing that we do very often anymore. So it's a good exercise to talk about. Even if you're not going to break them up, it can be a good question and a good discussion starter in your group. I will have blank paper and blank index cards on the leader cart for you this week if you need to pick some up. So that brings us to the video portion of the night. The video this week is about 11 minutes long. The first little section with the intro kind of leading up to telling us that it's the Paul the Apostle series, I'm going to try to cut that out so we can get it down to about 10 minutes. So we're going to do 2 showings this week at 7:05 or 7:15. Pick which will work best for your group. That information is in the email as well as a reminder to you. So this video this week is pretty solemn. It's a rough part of Paul's life. We're really talking about the end of Paul's life when he's been imprisoned in Rome. And so there are some things that you'll see in the video just about the space when they're in Mamertine prison that I want to talk about first. So as we watch David in the video, off to the right of where he's sitting, there's a tall cage-like feature that's around a column. The cage was added later, and the column is actually where they would have chained prisoners in that prison. So it wasn't enough that there was no escape other than through that hole that's now covered by that metal grate, but then you would have actually been chained to that stone pole that's there and that's been protected by that metal cage. To the right then of that column is an altar, and that was also added later. You'll see pretty prominently throughout the video the upside down cross that's at the bottom of the altar there. That's just St. Peter's cross. It's not a creepy occult symbol. It's not anything weird. It's just very popular in the Catholic faith to see that, especially when you're talking about St. Peter. And since St. Peter was also believed to have been held in this prison, that's what that shrine is really about. That lower section there is as a dedication to St. Peter. The columns you'll see and a little bit of the top of the altar as well. If they zoom out, and you can see pictures of it online too, there's a mural above the top of it of St. Paul and St. Peter. So it really is an altar. It was added in later. The space that David is in would have been very stark, very dark as well, and very sparse, and the only people you would have had contact with is through that hole in the top that's now covered by the grate, which wouldn't have been there. So that's something you can talk with your group about, especially as you get into that first set of discussion questions that are really processing what happens in the video. So when you get back into your small groups and you're starting to work on discussion here, I mark my books. I'm not sure if you guys do. Feel free to do that. You don't have to give these back to me. But these first 2 questions in the discussion section are really good for processing what you just saw. They ask about what it would have been like to lock up a prisoner, what the dungeon was like, what must it have been like for the Roman soldier who was chained to Paul. And David talks about those pieces a little bit, but really it's an opportunity to get your group thinking about what would this experience have been like for Paul. And then to use that as kind of background information as you start to talk about 2 Timothy and the letters that Paul wrote out from that place, because that would have had a huge impact on who Paul was as a person to sit in this cell by yourself or with this Roman soldier who was with him, and that being your only point of contact with the outside world. And so as we're talking about Paul, it can be really helpful for your group to be thinking about this background and this context for the letters that he's writing and sending out from prison. If you have time for it too, I think this question here on the next page about Red Bull Christianity can be a really good discussion for your group. David Nasser is really getting at this idea that we have in our culture about constantly needing to fill our schedules with something busy and finding those mountaintop God moments like what we get when we're at a week long at camp or on a retreat to Camp Wapo. Those are kind of the moments we live for. And David's really kind of setting that down and saying life is bigger than that. It's more than just those mountaintops. It's this endurance and this race that we have to go through. And it's a big culture shift for someone who's living in that busy, which I think a lot of our kids can be. And to shift them back and say, this is something you have to sustain for the rest of your life. How are you going to do that? How are you going to live your life in the everyday and not just in the mountaintop highs? The next section this week is the Bible section. I don't want you to miss this question at the bottom of the page because it gives you the prompt to read from the 2 Timothy scripture. It specifically is 2 Timothy 2, 1 through 7. It makes a comparison between these 4 types of roles and how they would view Christianity. The questions that follow it can be good discussion pieces if your group latches onto it. If not, don't drag them through every question. The next section I really recommend is the next set of scriptures. It's 2 Timothy 4, 1 through 8. And really, we're starting to dig into hearing false teachings and hearing what we want to hear and being a culture that just feeds us back the things that we want to hear to make us feel better. It's almost selfish in a way. And it's that feel-good piece that David Nasser is really trying to get us to think about, because Christianity is countercultural, and the Bible does say things that push us and make us think differently about the world and the way we act in the world. And he's trying to get around to a point of saying, it's not always going to be about what makes you feel good. It's not always going to be about what makes you happy. It's going to be about what's best and what God is doing in the world. And it's a good conversation starter. You're probably going to have some pushback if you get to this question with your group, and that's okay. Let your kids kind of wrestle it out and think it out. There's no perfect right answer really in this. But for some of them, it may be the first time they're hearing this. Some of your kids in your group may be thinking, oh, God just wants me to be happy. And that's not entirely wrong. It's not entirely bad. But this may be the first time they're hearing that the Bible is challenging and Christian life is challenging. And it's not always going to be about being warm and fuzzy and happy and having everything you need. So you may want to be prepared for some questions about Paul himself and his life. I recommend just doing a quick Google search. Surprisingly, Wikipedia is actually pretty reliable on this one. I've checked out the Paul the Apostle page, and it looks pretty good. You may also want to do a little bit of searching about Mamertine Prison. I have a link included in the email for you if you just want to take a look at some of the pictures that maybe your group wants to see as well, but it does some explanation about the things that have been added in later, as well as what the prison would have been used for. So those are resources you may want to be checking into and going above and beyond to look at. But if you just have the bare minimum of time, the book is a great place for you to start. Make sure you watch the Right Now Media video before we get started this week, and I will see you on Wednesday.